I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
Princess Catherine had faced public scrutiny, private illness, and years of pressure without allowing the palace to see her break. But the letter placed before her that morning struck somewhere deeper. Meghan had formally demanded access to a protected collection of royal tiaras associated with Catherine's future role. As the princess read the final paragraph, her hand stopped moving. The request was not merely about jewels. It was a direct challenge to her place within the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine sat alone at Windsor when an aide entered carrying a sealed envelope. Windsor was one of the monarchy's working homes, where family matters met official duty. She opened the letter expecting a dispute over photographs, patronages, or ceremonial order. Instead, Meghan's legal representative demanded recognition of her right to 3 restricted tiaras. The collection carried rules older than either woman. The title Princess of Wales marked the wife of the direct heir and carried duties tied to the monarchy's future. Some jewels were reserved for that role, for a future queen, or for women in the sovereign's direct line. Meghan's demand went further. It required 1 piece for an international appearance. Catherine read the page twice. Her tea cooled untouched as the aide watched her expression change. When he asked whether William should be summoned, she pressed her fingers against the paper and answered, "He must hear it from me." Her voice was controlled, but the wound had landed. The tiaras were not trophies to her. They carried memories of Queen Elizabeth II, of Diana, and of conversations about sacrifice. The late queen had explained that royal jewels were held in trust, meaning the wearer protected them for the institution rather than owning them personally. Meghan's wording reduced that burden to favoritism, and Catherine felt years of restraint dismissed in a few cold lines. Then one name changed everything. The 3rd tiara should never have appeared in the request. Only a circle inside the royal household, the staff and offices supporting the sovereign, knew its location or restrictions. Someone with privileged access had spoken. Catherine reached the final page and found the threat. Unless negotiations began, Meghan's representatives would publicly challenge why some royal women received access while she remained excluded. The princess folded the letter, placed it beside the untouched cup, and steadied herself. William entered moments later. Catherine handed him the document, without explanation. He read the 3rd name, looked up sharply, and understood the danger. His anger was no longer aimed only at Meghan. Someone inside the palace had betrayed them. To the outside world, the conflict appeared to be about diamonds, pearls, and royal tradition. Inside the family, it was about identity. For Catherine, the tiaras represented promises made by women who had carried the crown before her. For Meghan, they symbolized the recognition she believed had been withheld. Between them stood William, forced to defend his wife without turning a private wound into a constitutional war that could divide the monarchy again. William entered the Windsor room and found Catherine standing near the window, holding the letter behind her back. She did not speak immediately. She simply turned, placed the document into his hands, and waited as his expression hardened. The confidential inventory was a restricted record listing where royal jewels were kept, who could access them, and under what authority. Its appearance in Meghan's demand meant someone had crossed a line far more serious than family disagreement. Catherine's connection to those pieces had formed slowly. Queen Elizabeth II had once explained their history to her in a documented private account preserved by a palace aide. The late monarch made one truth clear: royal jewels were never ordinary decorations. They were entrusted symbols, carried temporarily by women, expected to place duty above pride, comfort, and personal desire. Meghan saw them differently. During her years as a working royal, she believed access to major pieces reflected acceptance. To her, every restriction felt like proof that the institution ranked one woman above another. That wound had never disappeared. Distance from palace life only made it harder, sharper, and more personal. Catherine watched William reach the third tiara's name. His jaw tightened. She told him the request did not merely seek access. It blurred the difference between service and entitlement. Then her voice softened. Meghan knew exactly what those jewels meant to her. She knew their connection to the Queen, to Diana, and to promises made in private. William wanted the request rejected at once. He set the paper down and said the palace could not reward pressure. Catherine stopped him. An angry refusal, she warned, would allow Meghan to present herself as the victim of a cold and exclusionary system. The future king understood the danger. His wife's dignity was at stake, but so was the stability of the reign he would one day inherit. Then he revealed something Catherine had never been told. Months earlier, an intermediary had made an informal request for one of the same pieces. Palace officials dismissed it before it reached her. That earlier approach had now returned as a formal challenge. Only 6 people had attended the closed family meeting where the third tiara was discussed. Catherine silently reviewed every face. William remembered that one attendee later held an undisclosed conversation with Meghan. The first demand had not begun in a lawyer's office. It began at Buckingham Palace, during a private ceremony, where Meghan heard a promise that was never intended for her. Every royal crisis has a moment that appears harmless, until history looks back and recognizes the fracture. In this case, it happened after a private family ceremony at Buckingham Palace. A velvet case was opened. A promise was spoken. And Meghan, standing close enough to hear every word, realized that Catherine was being prepared for privileges she could never claim. What followed was not an argument. It was a quiet humiliation that hardened into determination and eventually returned as a formal demand. Catherine's access to the collection had expanded as her responsibilities grew. The title Princess of Wales marked the wife of the direct heir and carried duties linked to the monarchy's future. Some tiaras belonged to the crown, some were held in royal trust, and others could be assigned only through the sovereign's personal authority. That difference mattered, because wearing a jewel was never the same as owning it. Meghan had worn royal pieces before, yet certain tiaras remained beyond her reach. They were tied to the direct line of succession, or reserved for future queens carrying official duties. She saw that boundary as a judgment on her value. Catherine saw it as a burden attached to role, service, and years of public restraint. The breaking point came after a private ceremony marking Catherine's new ceremonial responsibility. Charles opened a velvet case containing a rarely seen tiara and looked toward her. "This will pass into your care when the time is right," the king said. Meghan stood close enough to hear every word. Meghan's expression changed as the lid closed. She asked whether the piece belonged to the family or to a particular office. Charles answered carefully, but Camilla stepped in before he could finish. The queen consort said it was intended for the woman who would one day stand beside the king. Catherine felt the humiliation land. She changed the subject and tried to draw Meghan into another conversation, hoping to soften the moment. Her kindness failed. The Duchess heard pity where none was intended, and that misunderstanding deepened the resentment already forming beneath her silence. Later that evening, Meghan confronted Harry in a palace corridor. She asked why their branch of the family was always treated as temporary. The Duke urged her to let the matter go, warning that another dispute would only widen the distance between them and the palace. She refused. Silence, she said, would make their exclusion permanent. A courtier overheard part of that conversation. Weeks later, the same official provided Meghan with a confidential summary explaining how the collection was divided and who controlled access. That private account gave her the exact language later used in the formal demand. The first request arrived soon after. It sought temporary use of one tiara for a charitable appearance. Palace officials rejected it quietly and never told Catherine, fearing another family rupture. Now that buried refusal had returned with greater force. William arranged a direct meeting, and Catherine chose to attend. The next time the two women faced each other, no velvet case would stand between them. Only a table, an accusation, and years of resentment ready to break open. The meeting began without raised voices. That made it more dangerous. Catherine sat opposite Meghan in a private drawing room, with no cameras, no public smiles, and no family members positioned between them. The disputed letter rested at the center of the table. Neither woman reached for it. For years, their differences had been filtered through aides, husbands, interviews, and headlines. Now every unspoken accusation was trapped inside one room, and Catherine intended to leave with the truth. William had agreed only after Catherine insisted that a direct conversation might prevent a public legal battle. A legal battle meant a formal fight through lawyers and official claims, one that could expose private royal records to the world. Harry accompanied Meghan to the residence, but the Duke remained in another room. The two women would speak without husbands, advisors, or excuses. Catherine entered determined to separate personal pain from constitutional reality. Meghan arrived believing tradition had been used as a weapon against her. To the Duchess, every locked case and restricted ceremony had sent the same message. Catherine belonged, while she was merely tolerated. That belief had hardened over years of distance, anger, and public humiliation. Meghan slid a printed inventory across the table. She asked why Catherine should control jewels belonging to royal history. The princess did not touch the paper. She said the collection was not hers and never had been. She carried responsibility for pieces assigned to her role, and responsibility was not ownership. Meghan leaned forward. She accused Catherine of benefiting from rules she had never needed to question. The Duchess said those rules had weakened her position and diminished her children's royal connection. Catherine listened until Meghan described the collection as unused wealth hidden behind sentiment. Catherine's composure broke. She told Meghan that some of those jewels had been placed in her hands by a dying monarch who expected her to protect their meaning. Queen Elizabeth II had left private written instructions, not decoration advice. They were a final statement of trust. Catherine removed a small handwritten note and placed it beside the inventory. Meghan read the first lines, then slowly pushed her chair backward. Her expression exposed something before her words did. Meghan recognized a phrase. She admitted, during that private recorded conversation, that someone had quoted the same words to her months earlier. The confession changed everything. Her source had not seen only a jewel list. That person had accessed the late Queen's restricted correspondence, meaning private royal papers protected from ordinary household access. Catherine gathered the documents. Meghan refused to name the source, insisting the person had acted against unfair secrecy. The princess stood and ended the meeting with one warning. Charles would now decide whether this remained a family dispute or became an act against the crown. The door closed behind Catherine, but the crisis did not end there. Power now shifted to the king, and his choice would wound someone no matter which path he took. King Charles received the file after midnight. He read Catherine's account, Meghan's demand, and the copied words of his late mother without interruption. Around him, the palace was silent, but the decision before him carried the weight of generations. A family disagreement could be forgiven. A breach of restricted royal correspondence could not. When he finally placed his pen beside the papers, the king understood that whatever he decided would wound someone he loved. Charles sat alone with Queen Elizabeth's handwritten instructions beneath his hand. The sovereign was the monarch holding final authority over many royal assets, while the Royal Collection Trust managed historic objects on behalf of the nation and the crown. Catherine could act as custodian of certain pieces, meaning she protected and used them through her role, but she could not grant access without higher approval. The king ran his thumb over his mother's signature and closed his eyes. She had once warned him during a documented private conversation that royal jewels became dangerous when people treated them as proof of personal worth. Her words now felt less like advice and more like a prophecy. Charles understood Meghan's sense of exclusion. He knew the palace had often hidden behind silence instead of explaining painful decisions. Yet sympathy gave way to anger when he considered the pressure placed on Catherine. The princess had carried public duties through months of private struggle, only to see memories of the late queen turned into leverage. Camilla entered before dawn and urged him to draw a hard line. The queen consort warned that hesitation would invite new demands and make every royal restriction negotiable. William agreed that firmness was necessary, but the prince cautioned his father against language that sounded personal or vindictive. One careless sentence could turn a security decision into another family war. Charles summoned the keeper of the privy purse, the official overseeing the monarch's private finances and household resources, alongside his private secretary and the head of royal security. He ordered every outside access request involving the disputed collection suspended until the breach was identified. The first discovery chilled the room. Security records showed that the confidential note had been removed from archive storage for 43 minutes, months earlier. The authorization carried the code of a trusted senior household figure. Charles demanded the name. The answer struck deeper than expected. The code belonged to an official who had served Queen Elizabeth and remained under the present king. That same person had maintained private contact with Harry after the Duke and Meghan stepped back from royal duties. Charles signed a preliminary ruling rejecting the claim. The document had barely left his desk when a communications aide rushed back with devastating news. The dispute had reached the press. By sunrise, Catherine's private inheritance had become a public battlefield, and someone inside the palace was still controlling the damage. The first alert appeared on Catherine's phone before breakfast. Within minutes, the forbidden collection, Meghan's demand, and the king's refusal were spreading across every major network. Details from the private meeting were included, details known only to 4 people. Catherine stared at the screen as one sentence repeated across the coverage. Meghan had been denied jewels controlled by the Princess of Wales. The truth had been twisted, and the woman already wounded was being portrayed as the gatekeeper. Catherine remained silent, while palace communications officers rushed to prepare a response. The communications office was the team responsible for shaping official public statements and protecting the monarchy during a crisis. Its message would explain that she neither owned nor personally distributed the disputed pieces. That distinction mattered because the story was quickly becoming one of greed rather than duty. Meghan's representatives moved first. Their written statement described her request as a search for fair historical recognition, not personal possession. The language placed moral pressure on the institution, while avoiding any mention of the leaked note from Queen Elizabeth. Meghan watched a broadcaster describe her as a woman challenging an outdated hierarchy, and for one brief moment, she felt vindicated. Catherine stood in her dressing room as an aide removed the tiara prepared for an upcoming state engagement. She decided that wearing it now would look defiant. Instead, she chose a simpler jewel. The decision felt like surrender, yet she knew one wrong symbol could turn a private betrayal into a public spectacle. William found her watching the coverage without sound. Catherine admitted she felt ashamed for grieving over objects when larger duties still demanded her attention. The prince sat beside her and rejected that judgment. Her pain was not about diamonds, he said. It was about memories of the late queen being deliberately turned into weapons. Harry's question shattered Meghan's brief confidence. He placed his phone face down after reading details from the private meeting and asked whether she had known the handwritten note would support the claim. The Duke warned that someone was manipulating both sides. Whatever campaign they had discussed had crossed boundaries neither of them fully understood. Royal security followed the media leak to an encrypted account linked to the same senior household official whose archive code had accessed the Queen's correspondence. The official admitted, in a recorded internal interview, that limited information had been passed to an intermediary. Yet the person denied leaking the meeting or sending private documents to the press. That denial exposed a second hand in the crisis. Someone else had received the material, sharpened it, and pushed it into public view for a separate purpose. As the palace prepared disciplinary action, Catherine made an unexpected request. She wanted to meet Meghan one final time, not to argue over ownership, but to discover whether both women had been used. Away from lawyers, aides, and royal protocols, they would now decide whether the deepest conflict belonged to them, or to the unseen figure who had been feeding it. Their second meeting looked nothing like the first. There was no inventory on the table, no legal representative waiting nearby, and no prepared statement hidden inside a folder. Catherine arrived carrying only the late Queen's note. Meghan came without Harry. For the first time, neither woman was protected by an institution or a spouse. What began as a final confrontation became something more unsettling, an admission that both of them had allowed old wounds to define the other. Catherine spoke first. Royal security had identified a chain of leaks built to provoke maximum conflict. The original source had shared information privately, but a former communications advisor had reshaped it into a public campaign. A communications advisor was someone responsible for controlling public messages, press strategy, and reputation. In this case, that role had been used to turn pain into pressure. Meghan did not deny it. She admitted in their private recorded conversation that the advisor had urged her to name several tiaras instead of requesting one. The Duchess had been told that a broader demand would force the palace to negotiate and expose contradictions in royal protocol. Protocol meant the formal rules guiding royal conduct, access, and ceremony. She had believed the strategy would win recognition. Catherine placed the Queen's note between them, but kept her hand over the final paragraph. Some words, she said, had been entrusted to her privately and would not become weapons in another public dispute. Meghan watched her hand remain still, then admitted she had never intended to attack those memories. Meghan wanted proof that her service and marriage had not become meaningless simply because she left Britain. She said the palace had made departure feel like erasure. Catherine answered with controlled pain. Recognition, she said, could not be taken from another woman's responsibilities. Catherine then revealed through a documented personal account how deeply the demand had hurt. She had been trying to rebuild her confidence after illness, and the claim made her feel that even the memories sustaining her could be dragged into public conflict. Meghan's expression softened. She confessed that the Buckingham Palace ceremony had made her feel erased. The humiliation stayed with her long after she left. Catherine admitted she had recognized that pain on the night itself, but remained silent because she feared making everything worse. Then the truth finally broke through. Meghan named the advisor who had transformed the private request into a strategic assault. She agreed to withdraw the legal demand. Catherine, in return, promised that the palace statement would not publicly humiliate her. They did not become friends. They established a boundary. Meghan would abandon every claim to the restricted collection. Catherine would acknowledge that the original exclusion had been handled without enough honesty. The private war was over. The public one was not. Outside the palace gates, the world had already chosen its heroes, villains, and version of the truth. And now the crown itself would be judged. By the next morning, the story no longer belonged to Catherine, Meghan, or even the king. It belonged to headlines, broadcasters, commentators, and crowds gathering outside royal gates. Some saw a future queen defending sacred tradition. Others saw a departed duchess challenging an institution built on exclusion. Yet one photograph cut through the arguments. Catherine, arriving at a state reception without a tiara, her expression calm, her head deliberately uncovered, while the entire country searched for meaning. Newspapers split the nation before breakfast. One front page declared, "Catherine defends the crown," beside an image of the princess entering the reception. Another asked, "Who owns royal history?" and framed Meghan's challenge as a fight against hereditary privilege. Hereditary privilege meant status and access passed through birth, marriage, and succession, rather than personal choice. That distinction mattered because the public was no longer judging jewelry alone. It was judging the system behind it. A national broadcaster opened its evening report with a sharper verdict. The presenter said the dispute was now about who had the right to represent the monarchy's past and future. Meghan's demand had become a symbol for exclusion. Catherine's refusal had become a symbol for duty. Neither woman fully controlled the meaning anymore. Outside Buckingham Palace, the divide became impossible to ignore. A crowd gathered beneath the balcony as the state reception began. One woman raised a handwritten sign reading, "Duty is not ownership." Another stood nearby holding the words, "History belongs to everyone." The two messages faced the same gates and captured a nation arguing with itself. Catherine paused before leaving her car and touched the simple pearl earrings she had chosen instead of a tiara. William asked whether she was ready. The prince understood that the missing jewel would speak louder than any statement. She nodded, stepped forward, and allowed the cameras to capture the absence everyone had expected to see. Meghan watched the arrival from California. The Duchess realized that Catherine's restraint had changed the story. Without a crown of diamonds, the future queen no longer appeared triumphant. She appeared wounded, disciplined, and unwilling to turn private pain into public revenge. Charles then released a formal ruling. The king confirmed that the restricted collection would remain assigned, according to constitutional role, historical custodianship, and the sovereign's written direction. Custodianship meant protecting royal objects for the institution rather than possessing them personally. His statement also confirmed the internal breach and promised disciplinary action. Meghan responded through a recorded public statement. She withdrew the demand and acknowledged that the jewels were held in trust. She offered no apology, but she accepted the monarch's authority and ended the challenge. The former advisor lost all royal access. The senior official resigned. The palace had restored control, but Catherine still faced one final choice. At the last state occasion of the season, she would either lock the contested tiara away or wear it and deliver the monarchy's final word. Weeks after the demand shook the palace, Catherine stood before the open velvet case that had begun the crisis. The forbidden tiara rested inside, untouched since the letter arrived. She could leave it locked away and allow the pain surrounding it to define its future. Instead, she lifted it carefully, remembering the late queen's words. These jewels did not belong to the person wearing them. They belonged to the duty that survived every argument, every humiliation, and every generation. Catherine asked the aide to leave before the diplomatic banquet. A diplomatic banquet was a formal royal dinner held to honor visiting leaders and strengthen relations between nations. Once the door closed, the princess unfolded Queen Elizabeth's handwritten note for the final time. She read every line slowly, folded it with care, and placed it beneath the velvet lining, where it would remain protected. The legal battle was over. Meghan had formally withdrawn her claim, the confidential leak had been contained, and Charles had confirmed that the collection would remain under established royal custodianship. Custodianship meant protecting historic objects for the monarchy rather than treating them as personal property. The king's ruling restored order, but it could not erase the pain that had exposed the family's deepest fractures. Catherine lifted the tiara and made her decision. She would wear it, not as a victory over Meghan, but as an acceptance of the burden attached to it. Hiding the piece would allow fear to replace service. Trial had tried. Wearing it would reclaim the meaning that betrayal had tried to destroy. William entered and stopped when he saw her. The prince did not praise the diamonds or speak about appearances. He looked at his wife and said quietly, "She trusted the right person." Catherine's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Her posture remained steady, because the late queen's confidence now felt stronger than the accusations that had once wounded her. Meghan later saw the banquet photographs from afar. The Duchess finally understood that the collection could never validate her place within the family. Her withdrawal became more than a legal retreat. It became an acceptance that royal identity could not be secured through possession, pressure, or public sympathy. Charles privately thanked Catherine through a documented conversation after the banquet. The king told her that restraint had prevented the dispute from becoming a permanent family war. He then ordered clearer rules covering jewel access, archive security, and communication with relatives no longer serving as working royals. Catherine entered the banquet wearing the tiara with calm authority. Meghan's claim was finished. The betrayers had been removed. The collection remained protected. What began as an attack on the princess's place ended by confirming it, not because she defeated another woman, but because she chose dignity over revenge and responsibility over possession. The tiara did not crown a winner in a family feud. It revealed which woman was prepared to carry its weight. And on that night, the monarchy's answer was complete.